The crystalline spires of Calax's capital city gleamed under the pale blue light of twin suns as Dr. Julian Maxwell stepped off the transport shuttle. After 3 years of long-range communication and 6 months of space travel, humans had finally arrived on the planet that had captured his imagination since its discovery. "Remember the protocols," Captain Marcus Rivera murmured beside him. "Their social structure is intricate and violation of their customs could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Julian nodded, adjusting the translator at his throat. As the mission's lead xenoanthropologist, he had memorized every scrap of information about Galaxian society, particularly their most sacred taboo. Their females were considered untouchable by outsiders. According to their beliefs, the females carried the spiritual essence of their species, and contact with aliens would taint that purity. The welcoming committee consisted solely of males, their tall, slender bodies covered in iridescent scales that shifted from emerald to sapphire as they moved. Their ambassador, Kalex, approached with a formal bow. "We welcome the human delegation to Calaxa," he said, his translated voice melodic despite the technology's limitations. "We trust your journey was without incident." The formalities proceeded exactly as Julian had studied. The humans were escorted to their quarters in the diplomatic compound, a transparent dome structure that allowed them to observe the city while remaining safely separated from the general population. That night, unable to sleep under the unfamiliar stars, Julian wandered the compound's botanical garden. The Galaxians had filled it with non-toxic specimens from their world, a thoughtful gesture that made him smile. He paused before a flowering vine with luminescent blue petals when a movement beyond the garden's boundary caught his eye. A hooded figure stood watching from the shadows, clearly Galaxian but smaller than the males he'd met. Julian froze. Protocol dictated he should leave immediately, but curiosity, his greatest strength and weakness, kept him rooted in place. The figure approached the transparent barrier and lowered its hood. Julian gasped. The female Galaxian had delicate features, with scales that shimmered a soft lavender in the garden's low light. Unlike the male's entirely reptilian appearance, her face held surprisingly mammalian features, large eyes with vertical pupils that studied Julian with unmistakable intelligence. The female raised a 6-fingered hand and pressed it against the barrier. Without thinking, Julian mirrored the gesture. "You are the knowledge seeker," the female said through what appeared to be her own translator device. "I am Thera, keeper of histories." "I'm Dr. Julian Maxwell," he replied, his heart racing. "How did you know who I am?" "Your transmissions were intercepted by my research team before official contact. Your theories about our evolutionary path were intriguing. Incorrect, but intriguing." Despite himself, Julian laughed. "I'd love to know where I went wrong." "That is why I am here. Our males believe knowledge should be controlled. I disagree." Thera glanced over her shoulder. "I should not be speaking with you. It is forbidden." "Then why risk it?" Thera's scales rippled with what Julian would later learn was their equivalent of a smile. "The same reason you remain talking to me instead of reporting this incident. Curiosity is not solely a human trait, Dr. Maxwell." A distant sound made Thera turn. "Tomorrow, the Eastern Archive entrance at Second Moonrise. The security field has a weakness there." Before Julian could respond, Thera vanished into the shadows. Julian stood frozen, torn between protocol and the unprecedented opportunity for true cultural exchange. He knew the risks: diplomatic disaster, mission failure, personal disgrace. Yet the thought of declining this chance was unthinkable. As he returned to his quarters, Captain Rivera intercepted him in the corridor. "Everything all right, Doctor? You seem troubled." Julian composed his features into what he hoped was a neutral expression. "Just processing everything we've seen today. It's overwhelming." "Remember why we're here," he said firmly. "Observation and official contact only, no deviations." "Of course, Captain," he replied, already knowing that tomorrow night he would break every rule in the diplomatic handbook. What he couldn't possibly know was how that decision would forever alter the relationship between two worlds. The second moonrise bathed Calax's architecture in ethereal silver light as Julian made his way toward the Eastern Archive. His heart pounded against his ribs, partly from the exertion of sneaking out without alerting security, but mostly from the recklessness of what he was about to do. 3 years of xenoanthropology training had drilled one principle above all others: respect cultural boundaries. Yet here he was, deliberately violating the most sacred taboo of Galaxian society. If discovered, he could single-handedly destroy humanity's first peaceful contact with an advanced alien civilization. "This is madness," he whispered to himself, but his feet continued forward. The Eastern Archive rose before him like a twisted spire of living crystal, its surface reflecting starlight in hypnotic patterns. Julian approached the spot Thera had mentioned and found a section where the security field shimmered with an almost imperceptible fluctuation. "You came?" The voice startled him. Thera emerged from the shadows, her lavender scales catching the moonlight. She wore a hooded cloak that concealed most of her form, but her luminous eyes fixed on him with unmistakable intensity. "I shouldn't have," Julian admitted. "But how could I resist the opportunity to learn directly from a keeper of histories?" "Follow me," she said, reaching through the fluctuating field. "Step exactly where I step." Julian matched her movements, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his diplomatic caution. Inside, the archive opened into a vast chamber filled with crystalline data structures, living memory banks that stored millennia of Galaxian knowledge. "This is incredible," Julian whispered, his translator barely capturing the awe in his voice. "Our scientists theorized your species might use crystalline data storage, but nothing this advanced." "Your own methods are primitive but surprisingly effective," Thera responded, leading him deeper into the archive. "I've studied your digital archives extensively. Your species makes up for technological limitations with creative approaches." They reached a small study alcove hidden from the main chamber. Holographic displays flickered to life as Thera activated the systems. "We have perhaps 2 hours before the guard rotation," she said. "Tell me what you wish to know, and I will do the same." What began as cautious exchange of basic cultural information quickly evolved into passionate academic discourse. Julian described Earth's diverse ecosystems, while Thera explained Kallax's complex symbiotic relationship with its flora. He detailed human social structures, and she revealed the nuances of Galaxian gender dynamics that official reports had barely scratched. "So the separation of females isn't just spiritual but pragmatic?" Julian asked, fascinated. "A protective measure from your evolutionary past?" "Yes, for millennia our females were few and precious, the bearers of genetic diversity during our species' darkest times. The taboos began as practical protection but evolved into spiritual doctrine," Thera explained. "Many of us believe these restrictions have outlived their purpose, but tradition is powerful." "That explains why you're risking so much to meet me," Julian said. "You're a reformist." "And you, what makes a human diplomat risk interstellar incident for forbidden knowledge?" Thera countered, her scales shifting to a deeper purple that Julian was beginning to recognize as intensity or perhaps challenge. "I became a xenoanthropologist because I believe understanding bridges divides," he said simply. "Official channels only reveal what others want us to see." Thera's expression softened. "My colleagues would say your curiosity is dangerous." "Isn't yours?" Julian smiled. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits despite the vast differences in biology and culture. The moment broke when a distant alarm sounded. Thera's scales paled with alarm. "Someone has detected an energy fluctuation. We must leave immediately," she said, gathering her materials. "Return tomorrow same time. I will show you a safer entrance." "Is that wise?" Julian asked, even as his mind raced with new questions he wanted to ask. "Wisdom rarely accompanies the pursuit of knowledge, Dr. Maxwell," Thera replied with what he now recognized as the Galaxian equivalent of a wry smile. "Yet here we both are." They parted at the security field, Julian slipping back toward the human compound while Thera vanished into the labyrinthine city. Over the next 3 weeks, their clandestine meetings continued. Each night they exchanged knowledge, scientific, cultural, historical, building a bridge of understanding between their worlds that the official diplomatic channels couldn't match. Julian noticed subtle changes in how he perceived the Galaxians during official meetings. Where once he saw alien features and mannerisms, he now recognized nuance and meaning. His reports became more insightful, earning praise from Captain Rivera, who remained unaware of the true source of Julian's deepening cultural understanding. You've adapted remarkably well to the Galaxians, Rivera commented after a particularly successful negotiation session. They seem to respond to you differently than the rest of us. Julian merely nodded, guilt mingling with pride. I'm just applying standard xenoanthropological principles, sir. That night, as Julian prepared for another secret meeting, his personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from Earth Command. Intelligence SUGGSDS unauthorized. Contact with KALAXIAN female population. All personnel REMINDED of zero tolerance policy for cultural VIOLATIONS. Julian stared at the message, his blood running cold. Someone suspected something, but how much did they know? And more importantly, would it stop him from seeing Thera again? He already knew the answer to that question, and it terrified him more than any official reprimand ever could. Julian's breath crystallized in the cool night air as he waited at their new meeting spot, a forgotten observation deck overlooking the ancient lava fields that bordered Calax's capital. The warning from Earth Command haunted him, but the thought of not seeing Thera again was somehow worse. "You're distracted tonight," Thera's voice came from behind him. She had an uncanny ability to move silently, a trait Julian attributed to the evolutionary advantages of her species' predatory past. "Earth suspects something," he admitted, turning to face her. "Not us specifically, but they know someone has made unauthorized contact." Thera's scales shifted to a muted gray, concern Julian had learned to interpret. "The High Council is also suspicious. Security protocols have been enhanced around female quarters." "Perhaps we should pause our meetings," Julian suggested half-heartedly. Thera moved closer, her scales catching starlight in hypnotic patterns. "Is that what you want, Julian?" The use of his first name, something she had never done before, sent an unexpected warmth through him. When had their formal titles fallen away? When had Dr. Maxwell and Keeper Thera become simply Julian and Thera? "No," he admitted, "these meetings have become important to me." "As they have to me." Thera's hand, smaller than a human's but with 6 elegant fingers, reached out hesitantly before withdrawing. "Our conversations have changed how I see my own world." Julian nodded. "I've learned more from you in these weeks than in years of formal study." They fell into comfortable silence, watching the peculiar phosphorescent clouds that drifted across Calax's night sky. Julian found himself studying Thera's profile, the graceful curve of her crest, the subtle shift of her scales as she breathed. When had he started finding alien features so captivating? "I've been working on something," Thera said suddenly, breaking his reverie. From her robes, she produced a small, crystalline device. "A private communication system. It will allow us to exchange messages without meeting physically." Julian took the device, their fingers brushing briefly. A jolt of something, not quite electricity but similar, passed between them at the contact. Thera's scales flushed a vibrant magenta he'd never seen before. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, alarmed. No, her voice sounded different. "That was unexpected. Our species' bioelectrical fields interacted." "Was it unpleasant?" Julian asked cautiously. Thera's vertical pupils dilated slightly. "Quite the opposite." Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary crossed that went beyond cultural taboos and diplomatic protocols. Julian felt himself drawn toward her, curiosity blending with something more primal and unexpected. "We should test the communication device," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Over the following weeks, their physical meetings became less frequent but their communication more constant. Through Thera's device, they shared not just knowledge but personal thoughts, memories, and eventually, feelings. Julian taught Thera an old Earth cipher that became their private language, a blend of human idioms and Galaxian concepts that would be unintelligible to either of their peoples. "The sunset today reminded me of your eyes when you're excited about a new discovery," he wrote one evening. "I dreamed of Earth's oceans from your descriptions," she responded. "In the dream, we walked together without fear of being seen." Their messages grew bolder, more intimate. Julian found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his childhood on Earth's last rainforest preserve, his parents' disappointment when he chose xenoanthropology over medicine, his occasional loneliness among the stars. Thera revealed her own struggles, the restrictions placed on female scholars, her rebellious research into pre-taboo Galaxian history, her secret dream of visiting other worlds. "If things were different," Julian wrote late one night, "would you consider exploring the stars with me?" Her response came hours later. "I already am through your eyes. But yes, if the universe were kinder to us, I would go anywhere with you." Julian stared at her words, confronting the truth he'd been avoiding. This was no longer about cultural exchange or forbidden knowledge. He was falling in love with Thera, a reality as impossible as it was undeniable. That realization should have terrified him. Instead, it brought clarity. Whatever the consequences, he couldn't walk away now. His reverie was interrupted by an urgent alert from Thera. "Verx suspects something. He's been watching me. Be cautious." Verx, the High Counselor's chief security officer, had made no secret of his disdain for humans during official meetings. If he discovered their connection. Julian encrypted a quick response. "Should we suspend contact?" Her answer was immediate. "No, but we must be more careful. Verx has requested access to the archive records if he discovers our meetings there." The implication was clear. Discovery meant disaster for both of them, exile for Julian, and for Thera, a fate potentially worse. As if confirming his fears, Captain Rivera summoned Julian to his office the next morning. "Dr. Maxwell," Rivera said without preamble, "you've been making exceptional progress understanding Galaxian culture. Perhaps you'd like to explain how." Julian felt cold sweat form along his spine. "Careful observation and analysis, sir. It's my job." Rivera's eyes narrowed. "Interesting, because I've been informed that someone matching your description has been seen near the Eastern District after curfew. Care to explain that?" "I've been observing night-blooming flora from the observation deck," Julian lied smoothly. "It helps me think." "From now on, all personnel are restricted to compound grounds after dark," Rivera said. "Direct order from Earth Command." Julian nodded stiffly. "Understood, sir." That night, Julian stared at Thera's communication device, torn between duty and desire. He had violated every protocol, risked an interstellar incident, and potentially compromised humanity's first contact with an advanced civilization. Yet as he composed a message to Thera, "We will find a way," he couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. What he didn't know was that on the other side of the city, Verx was already piecing together evidence of their forbidden connection, setting in motion events that would change two worlds forever. The diplomatic quarters buzzed with unusual activity when Julian returned from breakfast. Armed security personnel, human and Galaxian alike, lined the corridors, their faces grim with purpose. Julian's stomach tightened as Captain Rivera approached him, flanked by two officers. "Dr. Julian Maxwell, you're confined to quarters pending investigation into serious breaches of diplomatic protocol," Rivera announced, his voice carrying to ensure the entire delegation heard. "Surrender all communication devices immediately." Julian maintained a neutral expression even as panic surged through him. "May I ask what specific violations I'm accused of?" "Unauthorized contact with a Galaxian female, sharing classified information, compromising the entire mission." Rivera's face flushed with anger. "The Galaxian High Council has presented evidence that you've been conducting secret meetings with Keeper Thera for weeks." Julian's mind raced. The communicator Thera had given him was hidden beneath a loose panel in his quarters, if they searched thoroughly. "I've been conducting independent research, yes," Julian admitted carefully. "As xenoanthropologist." "Save it for the inquiry," Rivera snapped. "Your quarters are being searched as we speak. If there's anything else you'd like to confess, now would be the time." Before Julian could respond, a security officer approached with Thera's crystalline device in her gloved hand. "Found this hidden in his room, sir. Definitely not standard issue." Rivera's expression darkened further. "Take him to containment, full isolation protocols." As they escorted him through the compound, Julian caught fragments of conversations, phrases like diplomatic incident, treaty collapse, and immediate extraction. The mission was unraveling because of him. The isolation room was Spartan, a bed, a chair, and nothing else. No windows, no terminals, no contact with the outside world. Julian sat motionless for hours, his thoughts circling around one overwhelming concern: what had happened to Thera? On the other side of the city, Thera faced her own tribunal. The Chamber of Elders, A circular room with tiered seating that hadn't been used for a judgment in generations was filled with the most powerful males in Galaxian society. High Counselor Dravik presided, his ancient scales dulled with age but his eyes sharp with displeasure. Keeper Thera, you stand accused of the gravest transgression, willful contact with an alien male, sharing protected knowledge, and betraying the sacred traditions that preserve our species' purity, Dravik intoned. How do you answer these charges? Thera stood proudly, her scales a defiant blue rather than the submissive pale expected of females in the presence of elders. I shared knowledge to gain knowledge. There was no betrayal, only exchange. Verx, standing as chief accuser, stepped forward. We have evidence of multiple clandestine meetings. The human has been confined by his people. The communication device you created contained messages of, he paused dramatically, a personal nature. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Thera's scales rippled briefly before she regained composure. You violated our most sacred law, Dravik continued. The penalty is severance from community. You will be stripped of your position and confined to the outer territories for the remainder of your life. Before you pass judgment, Thera said, her voice cutting through the chamber, consider what you sacrifice. The humans possess knowledge that could advance our civilization by centuries. Dr. Maxwell and I have proven that cooperation is possible. Cooperation, yes. Intimacy, no, Verx hissed. The messages make clear this went beyond scholarly exchange. For the first time, Thera faltered. Our connection evolved, but it harmed no one. It threatened everything, Dravik thundered. Do you realize what you've done? The human delegation is preparing to leave Calaxa, years of careful diplomacy destroyed by your selfish actions. This news struck Thera like a physical blow. Leaving? They can't. We've barely begun to understand each other. The decision has been made, Dravik said coldly. The humans will depart within 3 days, and you will face the consequences of your actions. Back in the human compound, Julian faced his own inquisition. Admiral Hernandez, the highest-ranking officer in the sector, had arrived via emergency transport to handle the crisis personally. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done, Dr. Maxwell? Hernandez asked, packing the small room. This was humanity's first peaceful contact with an advanced civilization. Now they're demanding our immediate withdrawal. With respect, Admiral, Thera and I proved something important. That deeper understanding between our species is possible, Julian argued. What we learned could advance. Save the academic justifications, Hernandez interrupted. You violated the most sacred taboo of their culture after being expressly forbidden from doing so. The diplomatic team spent years establishing these protocols. The protocols are based on outdated traditions that even some Galaxians question, Julian persisted. Thera believes. Your Galaxian female has been sentenced to exile, Hernandez cut in brutally. Her career is over. Her life as she knew it is over. Was your research worth that cost? The news hit Julian like a physical blow. Exile because of him. I need to speak with her, he said, rising from his chair. Impossible. We're leaving in 72 hours. The Galaxians want no further contact. Hernandez's face softened slightly. You'll face a military tribunal when we return to Earth. Until then, you remain confined. Left alone again, Julian sat motionless, the weight of consequence crushing down on him. He had known the risks, but the reality of what he'd done to Thera, to both their peoples, was devastating. Hours later, a junior officer brought him dinner and a digital tablet. Captain Rivera thought you might want to prepare your statement for the tribunal, she explained awkwardly. When she left, Julian discovered the tablet contained something else. A message from Rivera himself. Official channels have failed. Maybe unofficial ones can succeed. You have 48 hours to fix this mess before we leave. Don't make me regret this. Included was restricted information about Thera's situation and the location of her confinement. Rivera, for all his anger, was giving Julian one last chance. Julian's mind raced with possibilities. The tablet had limited communication capabilities, enough to request a meeting with the Galaxian Council, perhaps. Not as a xenoanthropologist, but as someone who had experienced their world in a unique way. He began drafting 2 messages, one to the Galaxian High Council requesting an unprecedented hearing, and another, more personal one, to be delivered to Thera if possible. What had begun as curiosity had evolved into something that could either heal the rift between their worlds or drive them apart forever. Julian had never faced higher stakes, not just for himself and Thera, but for the future of human-Galaxian relations. He had 48 hours to change the course of interstellar history. The Great Hall of Reconciliation hadn't been used for its intended purpose in over 3 centuries. Built during Galaxy's first great planetary unification, its soaring crystalline arches and perfect acoustics were designed for moments when disparate voices needed to find harmony. Today, it would serve that function again. Julian stood at the center of the circular chamber, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes, human and Galaxian, fixed upon him. The Earth delegation occupied one section of tiered seating, their expressions ranging from Rivera's guarded hope to Admiral Hernandez's barely contained fury. Opposite them sat the Galaxian High Council, their scales shifting in patterns that reflected their collective skepticism. Most importantly, in a separate enclosure reserved for those awaiting judgment, sat Thera. Though physically separated by guards, their eyes met across the chamber in silent communication. The message was clear. Whatever happened, they faced it together. Julian cleared his throat, activating the room's natural amplification. Respected members of the Galaxian High Council, honored representatives of Earth, I stand before you not to defend my actions, but to suggest what they might teach us all. His voice echoed through the chamber with more confidence than he felt. My relationship with Keeper Thera began as a violation of protocol. It evolved into proof that our species can connect on levels deeper than formal diplomacy allows. High Counselor Dravik leaned forward, his ancient scales glinting in the ceremonial light. You broke our most sacred law, human. You still fail to show proper remorse. I cannot show remorse for discovering truth, Julian replied evenly. The taboo against contact with Galaxian females originated in a time when your population was threatened by extinction. It served an evolutionary purpose, to protect genetic diversity when females were few and vulnerable. Murmurs rippled through the Galaxian section. Julian continued, Keeper Thera's historical research confirms this. What began as practical protection evolved into spiritual doctrine over millennia. But Galaxy has changed. Your world is stable, your population secure. You presume to lecture us on our own traditions. Verk snarled from his position beside Dravik. I presume to share knowledge freely given by one of your own scholars, Julian countered. Knowledge that Keeper Thera was forbidden to share even with her own people. Admiral Hernandez stood abruptly. Dr. Maxwell, you're here to apologize, not to further antagonize our hosts. With respect, Admiral, I'm here to prevent a diplomatic disaster. Julian gestured toward the human delegation. Earth wants access to Galaxian technology and scientific knowledge. Galaxy wants Earth's interstellar transportation systems and cultural archives. Neither will get what they want if we leave in disgrace. Thera stood in her enclosure, drawing all eyes. High Counselor, request permission to address the assembly. After a tense pause, Dravik nodded reluctantly. What Dr. Maxwell and I discovered through our forbidden exchanges was not just knowledge about each other's worlds, Thera said, her melodic voice filling the chamber. We discovered flaws in the systems that govern both our peoples. Humans restrict information through classification and need-to-know protocols. Galaxians restrict it through gender-based taboos and religious doctrine. Both approaches limit potential. Julian felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Thera continued, Our connection, yes, even our emotional connection, proved that understanding transcends biological differences. It proved that traditions can evolve without destroying what makes them valuable. Rivera chose this moment to stand. The Earth delegation has authorized me to make a proposal. All eyes shifted to him. Instead of withdrawal, we propose establishing a new framework for cultural exchange, one that acknowledges Galaxian traditions while creating space for broader interaction between our peoples. Dravik's scales shifted to a contemplative blue-green. What specifically are you suggesting, Captain? A designated neutral territory within the capital, Rivera explained. A center for cultural and scientific exchange where traditional restrictions could be, selectively modified under controlled circumstances. Julian barely concealed his shock. Rivera had taken his hastily drafted proposal and formalized it without telling him. Thera seized the opportunity. Such an exchange would allow us to preserve our core traditions while creating space for evolution. It honors the past while embracing the future. The chamber erupted in overlapping conversations. Julian watched the Galaxian Council members communicating in their subtle language of scale patterns and micro-gestures. For nearly an hour, the debate continued around them, with Julian and Thera occasionally called upon to clarify points or answer questions. Finally, Dravik raised his ceremonial staff, calling for silence. For 10,000 cycles, Galaxa has maintained the separation of females from outside influence, he began gravely. This tradition preserved us through dark times, yet all things must evolve or die. He turned to face the Earth delegation. We will accept a modified version of your proposal. A cultural exchange center will be established, with strict protocols but increased flexibility. Relief flooded through Julian, tempered by his next words. As for the transgressors, Dravik continued, they have violated our most sacred laws, regardless of their intentions. Hernandez nodded grimly. Earth acknowledges Dr. Maxwell's violations of diplomatic protocol and accepts whatever joint punishment is deemed appropriate. Julian's heart sank. They'd saved the diplomatic mission, but not themselves. Therefore, Dravik announced, Keeper Thera and Dr. Maxwell will be assigned as joint directors of the new Cultural Exchange Center. The pronouncement stunned the assembly into silence. Their punishment is to live with the consequences of their actions, Dravik explained, a hint of amusement in his ancient eyes. They created this crisis. Now they must ensure it becomes an opportunity instead. They will serve as living bridges between our worlds. Admiral Hernandez looked thunderstruck. You want the rule breakers to administer the new protocols. Who better? Dravik countered. They understand both the importance of protocol and the cost of ignoring it. More importantly, they have demonstrated genuine understanding between our species. The formal proceedings concluded with detailed negotiations about the exchange center's implementation. Hours later, as the chamber emptied, Julian was finally permitted to approach Thera directly, though under watchful eyes. Did you expect this outcome? He asked softly. Her scales rippled with subtle amusement. Not precisely, but I suspected Dravik might see practical value in our unique situation. So we're to be examples now, cautionary tales and pioneers at once. Is that not what we've always been? Thera's six-fingered hand reached tentatively toward his. We crossed boundaries believing something valuable lay on the other side. We were right. Their fingers intertwined, alien to each other yet somehow familiar. Around them, humans and Galaxians continued their careful diplomatic dance, maintaining proper distance while sneaking curious glances at the unprecedented contact. This won't be easy, Julian murmured. We'll be under constant scrutiny from both sides. Most worthwhile things aren't easy, Thera replied. But we've proven something important, Julian. Connection is possible across even the greatest differences. As they walked together toward the chamber's exit, toward their complicated future, Julian realized they had become something neither of their worlds had been prepared for. Living proof that boundaries, even sacred ones, weren't always where you expected them to be. Behind them, human and Galaxian diplomats began the formal work of building bridges between worlds. But ahead of them lay the more difficult, more profound work of showing both species that understanding, and even love, could transcend the barriers of biology, culture, and space itself. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined when they first met in that garden weeks ago. It was, Julian thought with quiet amazement, something far better, a beginning. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.